Eden, Parker, it's all the same group in the same place. And they had been trying to get an amp for Dimebag for years and years. They had him, he must have had 1,000 guitars that they had made for him. It was just ridiculous. I mean, custom guitars, no, that's not exactly right, so they had to do another one. Another guy had 1,000 prototype guitars. But the amp thing, they did these versions of the Warhead, one was called, and some of them were kind of horrible, but he stuck around, he made money off of them, he got royalties, and so he was okay with that for a long time, but he was nearing the end of this long-term contract. It must have been 10 years, I don't know, and they just never got an amp that he liked. And it was cool because he didn't really feel right endorsing something that he doesn't like and he's not going to use. So they didn't like stack up a bunch of fake amps on the stage and have him have his little Marshall behind there, and he wouldn't do that. So they wrestled with him for years. He said, look, contract's going to run out in a few months. If you guys can't do this, I'll just go somewhere else and see if somebody wants to do an amp with me, because I'd like to have something that I can call my own. It's got my name on it. So they called me. So they take me and fly me to Texas, a couple of the guys, and take me to Dimebag's house. So we go to Dimebag Darrel's house, and it was in a just normal little suburban neighborhood. His parents lived down the street, and you'd never know this was where Pantera lived. They had a studio in the garage, except for the big bus in the driveway that said, you know, Pantera on it. So we go in, and he's got the Randall Warhead, the latest version that they're trying to get to work. And I worked with it. I said, I can't make this thing do what he wants. It's just, I don't know who designed it for him. It was just sort of years of people fooling with it, and that was just a mess of stuff. It didn't sound great either. But so I said, well, show me what, you know, he goes, let me show you what this is. And he was actually a nice guy. He was kind of gruff, but he was a nice guy. And he plugs in the amp and he plays it, and it's like, you hear that? And he starts telling me, oh, listen to that bass, listen to that. I said, he goes, that sounds like shit. I'm kind of like, yeah, it does, you know. He goes, I can't use this. He goes, I'm not going to go out and play with that and tell people that's my sound. I can't use it. I said, well, why don't you show me what your sound is? Obviously, he's got his sound in something else. He's got, his setup was a Randall solid-state RG100 head. Just a solid-state, kind of nothing, old Randall. And he had one of those little blue MXR 5-band graphic pedals. Actually, he had about 100 of them because they would break, and that was his sound. And he would plug that into the front, and he had an upside-down smiley face. It was all mid-range boost. It wasn't scooped out middle. He cut the mid-range on the amp, but he sort of used the MXR for a real mid-range boost in the front, and then cut the middle later. So it's kind of cool. And then he had this Furman parametric equalizer, and he's got that turned on, and that was it. That was basically the setup. And I look at the equalizer, and I go, what are you doing with that? Well, that's part of my tone. And I look, and every knob is exactly on 12 o'clock. It's not doing anything. And I said, well, you've got it set flat. It's not doing anything. He's like, well, no, I need that in there. It's part of my sound. Okay. And he played this thing, and it sounded great. It sounded like a great, hot-rodded, great-sounding Marshall. And it wasn't a Marshall. It was this Randall solid state. So that was his sound. And that amp over there that said Warhead on it didn't sound anything, because they never actually listened to what he had. Nobody ever went to his house and said, well, let me hear what you do, you know. So we did an amp for him. We said, well, okay, this is the guy, and they prop me up and say, here, this guy's the one that's going to do it for you. I said, okay, so then, you know, then we hopped in the limousine and went to the bar and, you know, all that stuff. In fact, the big, scary-looking biker, real scary-looking guy. So we go to this bar. I'll get back on the amp thing in a minute. We go to the bar. He might have owned the bar, I'm not sure. But he walks in and everybody's like, Dimebag's here, Dimebag's here. So it's just a neighborhood bar. We walk in, he's got a big table, and we're going to have dinner and drinks and all that. So They said, Egnater, sit over there. And I sit down, and here's this scary guy as the guy sitting at the end of the table. This is going to be weird. He was the nicest guy in the world, and he talked. You think I've got a squeaky voice? This guy was like, hi, how are you? And it was like, oh, this isn't real. And he said, Egnater, sit over there. And I sit down, and here's this scary guy as the guy sitting at the end of the table. This is going to be weird. He was the nicest guy in the world, and he talked. You think I've got a squeaky voice? This guy was like, hi, how are you? And it was like, oh, this isn't real. And it turns out that, so we got talking after I saw he wasn't really as scary as he looked. And he was actually in medical school. His father is a doctor. He was in medical school. This is for real. He was studying to be a doctor in medical school. And he was kind of bored with the college thing, and he saw an ad in the paper that says bus driver needed for rock band tour. So he applies for the job, and he quits medical school to drive. He goes, it just looked like something fun to do. So he then became the bus driver for the Pantera tour. And he's actually the other guy that got shot during that whole thing. He was the other guy. That, when he said one of the roadies got killed, it was that guy. And I was like, oh, God, I met that guy. So I don't mean to butt anybody out, but, so I actually met a couple of those guys. They were cool. But that's what the Dimebag thing, in fact, he takes me to the front, he says, Egnater, he didn't know my first name. He goes, Egnater, come here. And he takes me to the front door of the house. He opens the door, he goes, you see that house over there? Yeah. He goes, LMF is selling drugs out of that house. I'm going to burn that place down. It's like, okay. He goes, that's a bunch of shit. Why is he in my neighborhood? So it was just like a normal guy. All right, what's so normal? He's in the neighborhood with his mom and dad down the street, and nice little rolling hills in the backyard and stuff. Not any kind of mansion. So that was kind of cool.
Did you build him an amp?
We designed an amp. It was called the X2, and it was a Randall amp. And what I did actually was take the original Randall, at least the overdrive channel on it, was the original Randall circuit, and I took not the actual MXR 5-band graphic, but you can duplicate that without having sliders on it. So I made a duplicate of that, and it was built into the amp, and when you flipped the switch that said Dimebag, it switched in the equalizer, and that was his tone. He goes, perfect, that's great, that's what I need. He goes, I want some other stuff on there. He goes, I want lights around the knobs. It's like, what? He goes, I want a bunch of lights around every knob, so when you turn the knob, the lights go around. So it had all this stupid shit on it. But it was his sound, and he used it for a short while, and then I don't know what happened with that deal. His contract ended, and he ended up leaving anyway and going to Crank for about 5 minutes, and then he got killed. But he went to Crank, and all of a sudden they come out with a Dimebag tube amp. He wouldn't even talk about tubes with us. I said, Dimey, I know a lot about tubes. We could probably do something cool. I don't want tubes suck. I don't want tubes. And then he leaves after we do this X2 amp, which I have the 2 prototypes in my basement. But nobody knows it.
No, everybody knows.
And he leaves and goes to Crank, and I find out later that they actually gave him a third of the company. And then he gets killed, so now his girlfriend owns a third of Crank, which was kind of a weird deal. I mean, she was nice, but she owns Crank,
She knows nothing about it.
Yeah, so. But that's what happened with that. But yeah, we did this amp, and they were out. They actually produced them. Had this big stainless steel front with a big green X2 on it. And it was kind of a cool amp, actually. But yeah, that was an experience working with him. As far as tone, just give him what he wants, and he says, here's what I want. Just do that. Don't do all that other stuff. Just make it sound like that. And that was easy enough, so we did.